So I'm just going to sit back for a few seconds and let you figure this one out. 4 blood moons, and then 2 blood moons, then a crescent with a comet flying through the middle. Should be easy peasy. And before I go any further, when God shows something twice, that double emphasis means you need to take it twice as serious.
I had this same dream a couple months ago. I took a screenshot of my notepad. I knew I wrote this dream down, so I had to really go in my notepad and go look for this dream. So don't pay attention to the bottom dream. That was another dream I had on that same night. So I had this moon dream again. And I woke up and I drew this picture of this dream, but he wanted me to look over here in the tree lining at the other moons. Now, they were white. As you can look up closer, there's a little blood tinge in them. And when I got closer to look at the moons, they were slightly turning a little bloody, and they were disappearing. But this one was really red, really, really red. And I remember my feeling in the dream was very excited fear. It was like a healthy, excited fear. And there were other people in the dream, but like I said, I don't know how to draw very good, but they were just scattered around. Now, they had a different fear. Their fear was like a real fear. And I also remember in the dream that my thoughts were thinking of Jesus. His name was in my mind in that dream. I remember I was thinking about him returning. So as you read in the clip that I tied in from my notepad, I had a dream a couple months ago. This dream, and as I was looking up, I saw the tree line again, and there was all these moons. There was 4 moons in the tree line, and then there was that blood moon. And I had this on April 30th of 2020. And the second dream that I'm going to share with you guys, I had on April 27th. So I'm just going to go ahead into the blood moon dream that I had. So the first dream that I had, it was nighttime, and I was standing outside, and I was feeling led to look up at the sky. And all of a sudden, this telescope showed up. And I was led to look into the telescope, and when I did, I saw these red blood moons, and I was so happy. I was excited, but I had this fear inside, like something was coming from this to prepare, that feeling of, not for me, but just for in general. There was this sense of urgency, like it meant something. It was something important, that of a feeling of preparedness. And but it was excitement. I was also very excited. I was very happy to see this. I remember I tried to get my phone out of pure excitement to try to record this. I wanted to show everybody what I was seeing. And I tried to put my camera phone in the telescope, and it just wasn't allowing me to take a picture of it. So then I took my phone, and I went away from the telescope. I took my phone and I aimed it up to the sky, and this is what I saw. Like, I'm not a really good drawer, guys. This is my phone, like the screen of how I would look through the phone, and I saw it like that. There was 2 blood moons, and they were exactly that way apart. They were almost not able to make it in the setting of my phone to see them at the same time in the screen, but I just made it. And I remember they were just blood moons. There was 2 of them. Now, I had a dream of 4 blood moons, and now I'm seeing 2. Then the second dream I had, in my dream, I was standing outside my parents' house in Georgia, and I was in the driveway, and it was nighttime, and there was these 2 trees directly in front of their house, and in between the trees, I was looking in between them, waiting for some kind of a celestial event to happen. And I saw a beautiful crescent moon directly in the middle, and I saw it was like a comet or a shooting star type of thing that was going left towards the crescent moon. And I just felt that same thing, that excitement, that happiness, but that fear. And I don't know how to explain that. That's the best I can explain it. Like I was waiting for something yet again.
She saw the 4 moons twice. And in her description that she left on her phone, she said, I saw 4 moons. They were red. In other words, they were blood moons. And in the second dream, where she held up a picture of 4 moons, they had a red tinge on them. Again, that tells me 4 blood moons. And notice that they were evenly spaced. We've been looking at this all through this video. 4 blood moons evenly spaced in time is a 4 blood moon tetrad. 4 blood moons, all 6 months apart, falling on an appointed time of God. We saw it in 2014 and 2015, with those blood moons landing on the appointed times of God that are assigned to a full moon. That's Passover, followed by Tabernacles, followed by the next year's Passover, followed by that respective Tabernacles. 4 blood moons, evenly spaced 6 months. Well, these 2 videos, one is identified as November 2019, and the last one is identified as April 2020. So her tetrad has to be past 2020. And like I said in this video, we're standing in the middle of one right now. And the next one will be in the year 2032 and 2033. I don't think it's pointing to that one. I think it's pointing to the one we're standing in right now. And that's based upon all these previous dreams we just looked at. So back at the beginning of the year, I saw her 4 evenly spaced red-tinged moons as the 4 blood moons of this tetrad we're currently standing in. I mean, after all, those moons were red-tinged, and she typed into her phone, she saw 4 red moons. I mean, what would you equate that as? And this is the update now that we're into October of 2022. Those were not the 4 blood moons of the 4 blood moon tetrad we're currently in. I'm not all sure what the red tinge is, other than maybe it's kind of a reflection of the May 15th through 16th blood moon, kind of shining its glory on these 4 evenly spaced moons, and they're like reflecting some of the redness. I don't know. But she also states that there is a orangish red moon following these 4 moons, and she's watching all of that, or trying to watch them as they faded away, from a hunter's tower. Well, a hunter's tower would equate to a hunter's moon. The hunter's moon is the moon phase normally associated with October. And that orange moon that she has to the right of those 4 moons, I'm guessing that is the harvest moon phase of our September. And both the harvest moon and the hunter's moon will tinge orangish yellow. And another reason that I now think that these 4 evenly spaced full moons are the 4 full moons before the harvest moon of September is that these 4 moons for this year, 2022, are all super moons. That will be the full moon of May, June, July, and August, followed by the harvest moon of September, followed by the hunter's moon of October. And that completes all the parameters and descriptions of all the moons that she saw in this particular dream of 4 evenly spaced moons, followed by an orange tinge moon, followed by a hunter's moon. That's the only thing it can be. Meaning that the 2 blood moons that she was able to take a picture of in her dream would equate to the last 2 blood moons of this 4 blood moon tetrad we're currently in. That would be the super blood moon of May 15th into the 16th. The next day would be Passover. And then the second moon would be the blood moon of November 7th through 8th. The next day being the first day of Tabernacles. Now, because of the update, I find some of these dreams now out of order from what I had previously. But previously, looking at everything from a February-March of this year perspective, I thought everything was going to wrap up in May at that full blood moon into God's true Passover, which started at sunset May 16th. And this last dream of 4 evenly spaced supermoons, followed by a harvest moon, followed by a hunter's moon, well, that kind of flipped things around thanks to this update. So this next dream might seem a little bit out of place, and it kind of is, but at the same time it's not, because this dream spans almost 6 months. The first thing she sees is a blood moon, and when she draws or paints it, she draws 2 moons. That is a blood moon if it's on the same night, and she calls it an unscheduled moon. Then she goes into the house and comes back out and sees a cracked star that turns to light. And that cracked star that turns to light is between 2 moons, followed by 2 suns. 2 suns is a solar eclipse. And the first time I decoded this, I got it wrong. But anyway, let's get to the video. Let's listen to what she has to say. Let's let it play out. And we'll look at my initial decoding and the errors I made and how that was corrected.
This dream started out when I looked out of the window. I saw a red moon. And the special thing about it, it was not scheduled, so I went to a friend of mine and told her, hey, there's a red moon outside. And when I went back, the moon was gone. I went outside to see if I could find the moon. And when I looked up in the sky, I saw 2 moons and 2 suns. And at that moment, I felt like, okay, it's time. And in the middle of the two moons and suns, there was something that looked like a star. I do it for the formation to explain what I saw. It looked a bit like this. And at that moment, the star began to crack like this, and there came a bright light out of it, and then my dream ended.
So, any of this sound familiar? First thing she saw, blood moon. Okay, we're in the right genre. We're in the right mode. There it is. Does it match with all the previous dreams we looked at? Well, it does when it shifts to 2 moons and 2 suns. There are your 2 eclipses. And I can't believe I almost missed this one part. She said the special thing about this blood moon. Hello? When you get a dream and it says the special thing, you need to take focus. You need to dig this out and find out what's so special about it. If it's not special, that would not have been included in the storyline of the dream. There was something special about this blood moon. What was it?
The special thing about it, it was not scheduled.
It wasn't scheduled. Well, what does that mean? This is why I've been driving home the part about what calendar we're supposed to use to find the Aviv month of the barley. And the talking heads of the Christian church and all the denominations and all the non-denominations and the talking heads of the Hebrew church, they're all dialing it in to the spring equinox, and they're using all kinds of weird calendars, and they come up with a Passover that's usually a month early. But this current blood moon tetrad that we're in, they don't consider it to be a Hebrew blood moon tetrad because none of those blood moons land on their perverted appointed times. They think that Passover for 2021 was March 27th. No. The barley harvest in the spring of that year conclusively proved that it could only start in late May, May 26th. And they now believe that Passover for the year 2022 is April 15th. No, it's a month later, May 16th. There is no way the climate could have shifted that much from last year to this year to retard the harvest an entire month. The barley harvest for the year 2022 was completed around the first week of May. And I've got pictures and videos to prove it, as well as a super blood moon. But nobody knows that because they're just going to go to Google. Google, when's Passover 2022? Comes up mid-April. Why? Because it was determined using the spring equinox. You don't use the spring equinox. You use the completed harvest of the barley. That means that standing barley was cut down, threshed and winnowed and put in the barns, put in the granaries. When that's done, then the harvest is done, and then you take a handful of it and you go to Passover. You observe and celebrate the Passover with the slaying of the lamb on the 14th of that month. And at the beginning of the 15th at sunset, you partake and consume that roasted lamb. And that starts the first day of the 7 days of unleavened bread. And you look for the weekly Sabbath that falls within that 7 days, the day after which you take that handful of barley, you crush it, you turn it into flour, you mix it with oil, and then you bake it and you roast it in the form of unleavened cakes or unleavened bread. Then you bring it to the priest who weighs it before the Lord. They keep a large part of those unleavened cakes and breads for sustenance in the following days, weeks, and months, but they'll take a little piece of it and put it on the altar where it is consumed by the flames and turned into a sweet incense unto the Lord. And by doing that, God gets the first bite of the first fruits. And everybody partakes of the crushed grain, which represents Jesus being crushed on the cross. It's a holy communion between those that produce the grain, that would be the farmers, the priests, and God himself. Everyone is partaking of Christ. Christ, our first fruit grain wave offering. The farmer gives God his first fruit. God gives his first fruit. The farmer's first fruit is the barley. God's first fruit is Christ. And they consume it together in communion. Christ being that first fruit offering that is being consumed because he was pierced and profaned on the cross. We consume him. His Father consumes him. We're in communion. But what she brings out in her storyline of her dream was this blood moon, which is Passover, was not scheduled because we have a false one. And that's what I brought up before concerning Pentecost. The entire nation of Israel missed Pentecost. Even though they had the correct Passover of that year, because Christ was crucified on that Passover, that kind of qualifies as it being the correct Passover, they missed Pentecost because the way they calculate Pentecost is incorrect. These talking heads have been messing this up for thousands of years. And it's the spirit of Antichrist, according to the prophet Daniel, that has the main job function of changing the appointed times of God. And he's been very successful at it. And I think now God's trying to change it back to how he originally designed it and orchestrated it. And that's the one Jesus fulfilled. He fulfilled the appointed times of God. So when this young lady said that, it went right through me. I went, this is what I've been battling with for years now. And she saw it in her dream. She just didn't understand what it is. And most of the Christians out there, especially on YouTube, they're just going to go Google things and, hey, there's a reason God put it in her heart and in that dream to point out this special item. This blood moon was not scheduled.
The special thing about it, it was not scheduled.
So for God to give her the words, for her to speak forth, the special thing about it, it was not scheduled, is extremely important to God's heart. He made that an emphasis. She verbalized it when she narrated what she saw. In other words, God must be passionate about this specific item. So I'm going to continue now. So now I will be heavily emphasizing that partial solar eclipse on April 30th and that super blood moon lunar eclipse on May 15th into the 16th, which is followed by God's true Passover for 2022, which started at sunset May 16th. And here's the correction in the update. Those two suns that she drew under the cracked star is not the April partial solar eclipse, it's the October 25th partial solar eclipse. That's what I got wrong way back at the beginning of the year, and that's what's being corrected, and that's what all the new dreams that are coming forth are pointing to and confirming. And what does she see right in the middle of it? An event. An event described as a star. I wonder if this has anything to do with that shooting star this other dreamer saw. And what happens to that star? It cracks. And it results in what looks like a stream of light going between the two suns and the two moons. And just not any stream of light. This thing looks like it was smeared across the sky. I mean, look at it. Does that really look like a stream of light? It looks like a smear. Like I said, this doesn't make any sense until you consider what a cracked star is and a smear of light. Hey, at this point, it's anybody's guess. But I'm guessing it's going to be matched with the asteroid this one dreamer saw, which was described as a shooting star that this other dreamer saw, and it was going right through the time period which was expressed by the middle of the 4 blood moon tetrad, which I initially thought was the middle of that 4 blood moon tetrad we're currently in, and that being from the tabernacle blood moon of November 2021 to the Passover full blood moon of 2022. And this is the update. Please remember that when we first started decoding and deconstructing these dreams, that was the end of last year. We didn't think of maybe, hey, this is talking about the last 2 blood moons of this 4 blood moon tetrad we're currently in. And that appears to be the case now that we're seeing all these double applications of these prophetic dreams and all these new prophetic dreams, especially these last couple weeks, all of them pointing to that last blood moon on November 7th through the 8th, and that small fact that no rapture events have been seen of yet, especially between those 2 blood moons leading up to May 16th, 2022. So there's only one option that remains in the 2 choices that have been given us, and that is that the 2 blood moons she saw on her phone photograph has to be talking about that timeline when that cracked star, that shooting comet, that asteroid coming down from right to left by 2 planets, even though it starts midway between this 4 blood moon tetrad, well, it will complete between the last 2 blood moons of this 4 blood moon tetrad. That last blood moon being this November 7th through the 8th with Tabernacles or Sukkot starting the next day at sunset on November 9th. Or will it complete on November 9th? Because this cracked star that was between a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse, well, even that timeline has just expired. And again, I get back to multiple applications for these dreams. Well, that blood moon that's coming up on us on November 7th into the 8th is also an unscheduled blood moon. And that's because of the wrong calendars that people have been following ever since the Hebrews came out of Babylon. And the dreamer did not have any more information to give us as to whether that was a super blood moon or not, just that it was an unscheduled blood moon. Well, the next major celestial event after this November blood moon is a solar eclipse in April of next year. So that cracked star is still in play for that timeline from the first week of November to April 20th of 2023. And that indeed would allow that event to happen, if it's meant to happen, on the 7-day festival of Tabernacles, with the 8th day being a convocation. Again, that starts at sunset November 9th. And that Tabernacles is between the blood moon and the April solar eclipse of 2023. So everything is still in play. It's just that things continue to get updated because we get more breadcrumbs as the days go on. Sorry about that, but that's the hand I've been dealt, and I'm trying to respond to it as best I can as things evolve. And I felt on my heart for a long time that God is going to walk us through the 7 months of appointed times, covenant dates, and convocations that we are to observe each and every year. From the first day of the month of Exodus, the month of Passover, which is Rosh Hashanah, to the 8th day that is added to the 7 days of Tabernacles. That's just 2 or 3 weeks shy of 7 months. And that being the case, it would not surprise me if God saved that great wonder in heaven, this cracked star, for the Festival of Tabernacles. Again, this is uncharted waters, a lot of guesstimation going on, a lot of multiple applications for dreams going on. I'm convinced of that. But this is the manner which God chose so that he can get our focus and our attention and hopefully our desire on the appointed times of God. And one other thing real quickly to help clear up any possible confusion. When you see that pictorial or that picture of the 4 blood moons, you'll see the date on there with Passover and Sukkot, or Passover and Tabernacles. The appointed times do not fall on the blood moon. They come on the 15th of that respective month, which is usually sunset the day after the blood moon. So just to make it clear, for this year 2022, the blood moon for Passover was on May 15th through midnight into the 16th. Passover was some hours later, starting at sunset on the 16th of May. That's when that started. The first day of the 7 days of unleavened bread for 2022 began at sunset on the 16th of May. The first 12 hours of that is Passover. And the day before that was the day of preparation, where the Lamb is crucified and prepared for that sunset. And that was the day Jesus was crucified, the 14th of the month of Aviv. And we found that on that particular day there was a super blood moon, fitting that the blood moon should be on the day when the blood was shed. And then that last blood moon is on November 7th through midnight to the 8th, with the first day of Tabernacles beginning at sunset on the 19th of November. And we went into Stellarium and we looked at when is that first visible sliver crescent moon over Jerusalem just after sunset, just before moonset. And we needed that sliver crescent moon to find the first day of the month for both the month of Passover and the month of Tabernacles, because on the 15th day after the first Hebrew day, that's when those appointed times are to be observed. And those are the numbers and the dates we came up with. Just trying to dial in as much accuracy and technical rocket science stuff as we can. So here we go. This is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I'm going to dive right into it. It's unscripted, and I have no clue how this is going to turn out. But just to help things along, I'm going to throw up a montage of 9 of the dreamers that put their dreams out on the YouTube for people to critique, and I'm guessing most, if not all, of these dreamers have gone through some hard times from family and friends and members of the body of Christ coming down on them kind of hard for putting this stuff out there because it doesn't make any sense. Well, I threw their pictures up there so you can see who they are, and so I can refer back to their dreams when I complete the final segment of this video. And I hope they don't mind that I use their channel name that they have on their YouTube channel. That way you can identify them. And I will be putting up as many of the original postings as possible in the description box so you can actually go back and see their entire posting. Because some of these I had to crop, I had to edit just to shorten it up and to just bring out the essence of what they were saying. So I hope and pray that they're not upset that I'm using the names that they have on the YouTube channel. I'm guessing I have their permission because they've got their name up there for everybody to see in the first place. In addition, I'll be using the title Dreamer or Dreamers And I've come to respect these people because of the heat they probably took by putting this stuff out. Because I've come to understand what they claimed was a dream from God was actually a dream from God. They just didn't realize that the images of moons and suns and planetary alignments were actually celestial calendar events. They're calendar events. God established that in Genesis 1. I will have the sun and the moon as for signs and wonders and times. So when they asked God, Lord, when is this going to happen? He gave them a calendar event. It would be similar to someone saying, when are you coming home to visit? And you get an emoji of a turkey, pumpkin pie, and some pilgrims having a dinner with some Native Americans. Well, that's Thanksgiving. God gave these dreamers, as it were, an emoji, 2 moons, or a blood moon, or 2 suns, or a combination thereof. He just wasn't ready yet to give them the key to decode what those meant. But it was sitting in front of us all along, because that's how he did it in the Old Testament. God said to Moses, on this next crescent moon of the anniversary where you came out of Egypt, you will cleanse and anoint the tabernacle. And then you will cleanse and anoint Aaron, the high priest, and his sons, which is the priesthood. When? At the new moon. The moon is central and paramount to God's calendar events. He uses the moon as the primary image for his calendar. He uses the sun as the primary image for the 12 hours of the day. And anytime he uses the sun as a calendar, the moon is always involved, which would manifest as a solar eclipse, the moon eclipsing the sun. It's the moon. And what's everybody seeing? 2 moons, 2 bright moons, or a blood moon, or a dirty moon, with another moon somewhere in the vicinity. Those are lunar eclipses. Now, I find it critical to spend just a couple moments on defining what a new moon is. There's a bit of controversy out there because people are serious about dialing in their calendar to find the appointed times of God and to promote their ideology concerning the calendars. This ties into the Enoch calendar, the Sons of Zadok calendar, lunar calendars, and all of these are false calendars. But there's a more practical reason why God gave Moses a specific type of calendar, which is basically the moon phases. And this was correctly reflected by the Hebrew church back in the day, where the Sanhedrin would send out 2 witnesses on or about the day that the moon had totally waned to 0 illumination. And when they saw that first sliver crescent moon bust out of the darkness of the night sky, they would run back to the Sanhedrin, give their testimony that they have seen the sliver crescent moon, and the Sanhedrin would announce that this was the first day of the Hebrew month. And this is why it's so practical. Here are 3 full moons, a couple days apart from each other. Can you tell the difference? We got one at 98% waxing, 100% full illumination, and 98% waning. If you look close enough at these Stellarium renditions of these full moons, you can barely tell that there's a difference. Back in the day, you couldn't tell because you didn't have Stellarium or a computer to magnify this. You had to go out and look up, and who knows how much dust or clouds were in the atmosphere on those 3 given days to decide which day was the full illumination. I mean, you can bet that the temptation would be so overwhelming to use that first brightest moon you can find, even though it might be 97, 98% illumination. But you're going to use that because that's the first thing that comes across your path. So that's what you can use for your first day of the month if you use a full moon to determine that, or for Passover, or for Tabernacles, and that would be incorrect. The impatience of the human condition would choose that over a full moon. And in almost every situation, in every case where a full moon defines a God-appointed event, you would be off by a day. That's what human nature tells me. So there's no way you can use the full moon to determine a first day of the month. You could be off by 2 or even up to 3 days, depending upon the atmospheric conditions. Besides, I don't think the Sanhedrin would be sending anybody out. All they have to do is walk out on their porch and look up for themselves. So relying on a full moon to start a Hebrew month just doesn't work. And that's why God didn't use it in that capacity. Well, how about a fully waned, 0 illumination dead moon? This is what modern society calls a new moon. But there's nothing new about it. It just died. And again, there's a 3-day period where you don't know where that moon is in its phase. Is it 2% from a complete 0 illumination in its waning mode? Or is it 2 or 3% now beginning to wax and reflect more of the sun's light each and every day until it reaches its full phase. Here are 3 dark moons on or about the 1st of April that will take place as presented by Stellarium. The human eye can hardly tell the difference. And again, if there's any dust in the atmosphere or any clouds, you're not going to be able to discern where that moon is and when that moon is. And again, it's a certainty that if this was the procedure people would use, they would choose the first dark moon they could find. That is to say, the first time they can no longer see the moon, they would declare that as the new dead moon. That is just how we are wired. And that being the case, in almost every calculation, in almost every circumstance, Passover would be observed 2 or 3 days before a full moon. As with Tabernacles, because both of those appointed times of God are to be observed on the 15th day of the month. And if we were to dial in a new moon, at the first moment the moon goes dark, well, 15 days from that moon first going completely dark to the naked eye would leave the moon phases a couple days short to bring forth a full moon. That's simply how it works. In reality, a full moon occurs 15 days after a sliver crescent moon. If you back that up 2 or 3 days, well, you're going to be short every time. And it bears repeating, the Sanhedrin sent out 2 witnesses to find the first illuminated moon, the first sliver crescent illuminated moon. They did not send them out to discover the first day that they could no longer see the moon. And that was the protocol that the Hebrew nation practiced for thousands of years and practice today. This is the only thing that works. This is the only thing that is practical. Let me explain. God imposed a practical means and a more discernible means to identify the first day of the Hebrew month, where there's no guessing involved, just a clear discernment of spotting something new in the sky. That's why it's called a new moon. There's something new in the sky. So it's highly impractical that God's going to use a full moon or a fully waned zero illumination dead moon to mark a first day of the month. And this is why he uses the witness of the first visible sliver crescent moon that these 2 witnesses go out and search for. It is easily and readily discernible. You don't have to guess. Boom, there it is. From darkness to light. And the moon will reveal itself from a completely darkened sky to this huge beam of light. There is no guessing. The day is specific. It's not 2 days before or a day after. It's specific. It's from a darkened sky that now has a curved streak of light shining through it. It's like somebody turned on a flashlight and flashed it in your face. There is no guessing involved. That is the day. So that's why God used it. Because obviously they did not have computers back then to calculate a certain phase of the moon, nor did they have Google to ask, "Hey Google, when's the first day of the month?" And it bears repeating. This was the practice back in the day. I mean, from the time of Noah up until today, this is what's practiced by the Hebrew church. This one they got right. And if you do the math, if we were to take a fully waned, dead, zero illumination moon, if you count 15 days, Passover would never land on a full moon. It would always be a day or 2 before a full moon. And that just doesn't work with God's typology, especially when there is a full blood moon tetrad involved. So God's determination of when the first day of a month is not based on something mystical or magical. It's based on practicality. There is only one option that delivers the goods every single time. And that's not a full moon, that is not a fully waned zero illumination moon. The only one that works is that first crescent moon busting forth from a darkened sky. It's practical. It works. And of course, it's critical to know the first day of the first month of God's calendar year, because that's Rosh Hashanah, and this one, May 2nd, 2022, is the beginning of the next 7-year Shemitah. I hope this helps clarify just a little bit more how God uses the moon and the sun for his calendar events and his calendar markers, his emojis. So God throws up his calendar and he places lunar eclipses and full moons and solar eclipses on that calendar. And then in the dream, he impresses upon those dreamers the significance of that day, be it a rapture event, be it a terrible storm coming, aka the tribulation, or whatever. And in this case, when we marry all these dreams together, we get a celestial storyline made up of a celestial calendar event followed by another celestial calendar event followed by another, then another, in sequence. Very detailed, very specific events. And when you line all these up and connect the dots, We got this thing over here called Stellarium. When we apply it, it provides us a virtual unfolding of these events. And so with these dreams, and now with the new dreams we are receiving, as well as better renditions of some of these dreams that I kind of messed up on earlier, well, everything is pointing to that last blood moon of the 4 blood moon tetrad we're currently in, that blood moon, and the partial solar eclipse 2 weeks earlier from that, being from October 25th of 2022, that's the partial solar eclipse, to that blood moon of November 7th into the 8th. And that could easily extend to the 8th day of Tabernacles, which is the final convocation in God's monthly Shemitah, which we have to observe each year. Those are the 7 months from Rosh Hashanah through Tabernacles. It's not really called a Shemitah. I just do that because, well, it's a 7 months. We've got the smoking gun. We've got smoking guns. And I strongly suspect that if we look from the time of Noah to 500 years from now, this is the only date in human history when all the parameters that we have examined so far connect. I mean, just that Vesta asteroid dream, that in and of itself confirms beyond any reasonable doubt that this was from God, and what God impressed on that sister in the Lord was this is rapture related. End of story. But what you're about to see makes that pale in comparison. And the only way I can approach that is I have to take this dream and immediately attach it and marry it to this other dreams we just got done looking at. And it'll make total sense once we get into it. They're the same dream, comes from the same source, the same author, comes from the throne. So a couple of ground rules before I jump into this. Again, disclaimer, I'm not a prophet, I don't interpret dreams, I'm not setting any dates because none of these dreams are mine. So I'm not hearing from God as to, hey, I saw this in a dream and he's saying this date. I'm applying it to the science of God, to God's science. I'm utilizing God's calendar emojis, the moon. When I use those keys, this thing is decoded. These dreams make sense. They illuminate or point to a time that we are going to face here shortly. You need to get into this. You need to research it. You need to wrap your head around this the best you can. You need to go out and get Stellarium. It's a free download. Download it on your computer. Test the information that I put before you. I promise you, you're going to come up with the same thing. The second thing is I'm putting up this montage of 9 of the dreamers out of respect. So that way I can say, well, Crystal, her second vision, and all you got to do is look on this because I'll throw it up on the screen. You go, oh, yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, she said this. And if you don't quite remember it, you can stop the video and go back and find it and say, yeah, she said that. Or this specific information was brought out in this dream, or in this celestial storyline. It just makes it faster for me and easier for you. And like I said, I'm doing this out of respect for these dreamers, because I think if somehow this video catches up to them, they're going to see, hey, it was from the throne. I wasn't crazy after all. Now, some of their interpolations and interpretations and descriptions or explanations of what they saw, I can't help them with that. This is why I'm so passionate against what I call the Christian mythology of Nibiru and, oh, Nephilim. There's one. Hey, guess what? I found the Nephilim. You're going to be seeing the Nephilim of God that some people have pulled out of these dreams. I saw Nephilim. It's not angelic human hybrids. It's a giant, though. You're going to see it. So now these dreamers and other dreamers, and those passionate in chasing the rapture, they will actually have some science behind what they're talking about and not some crazy element added to it, like Nibiru or zombies or 450-foot Nephilim that they pulled out of the Book of Enoch and plugged into the Genesis 6 narrative. Stay away from the Book of Enoch. It's impossible for Enoch to have written that book. He was out-translated before Noah was even born. But in the book, we have this alleged Enoch recording a conversation between Noah and an angel. Not sure how he got into that middle of that conversation, but he wrote it all down. It's in the Book of Enoch with this conversation that happened 400 to 500 years after Enoch was taken by God. Enoch wasn't there to record it. It also provides a solar calendar of 364 days. Last time I checked, our solar calendar is 365 and a quarter days. You mean to tell me that God has a dysfunctional calendar that he gave the children of Israel and the church to determine his appointed times? That calendar doesn't work. It loses a day a year. It just loses it. It's gone. It's not that the calendar is slow or fast. The day just disappears. That would be the equivalent of you looking at your watch. It's not slow or fast. It just loses an hour a day. It's gone. Doesn't exist. Hello? Somebody explain to me what's wrong with that picture. I mean, I can go to the dollar store and buy an electronic watch for $1 that keeps better time than that. So if that Enoch calendar came from God, well, God has issues, and maybe he needs to visit that dollar store and get a watch that works. And all the appointed times of God was based on the calendar God gave Moses, and I explained it 3 or 4 times in this video. It's based on the completed harvest of the barley wheat. It's harvested, it's threshed, it's winnowed, it's put into the granaries, it's locked down. You can't eat any of that new grain until God gets the first bite. And that's all established on God's emoji, the crescent new moon, which is the lunar cycle to the crescent new moon to the crescent new moon. And it's worth repeating. It's the spirit of Antichrist that has worked to change the appointed times of God, and he does it through fraudulent calendars. That all came from the book of Enoch. And oh, by the way, these angels that talked to Enoch took him to heaven and told this alleged Enoch that he would be the Messiah. Oops, that didn't work either. I could also mention how it's recorded how the ark was built. No, Enoch wasn't there to record that. And that angels built the ark. Angels didn't build the ark. Noah and his sons did. And the Nephilim, that takes the cake. 450-foot human-angel hybrids. If you read Genesis, the sons of God having relationships of the daughters of men happened after the giants were on scene. The giants were tribes of very big people, probably the size of Goliath and the other giants that David fought against, but they weren't 450 feet tall. God's science would tell us anything that big would crush their lungs under that size. They'd be dead in seconds. The sons of God in the day of Noah were those people that walked with God. And we can turn to a precedent that we see in the Old Testament under Moses, where those people were called the sons of Israel. And what did the sons of Israel do time and time and time again? They married into the pagan cultures around them. They married the daughters of men. Now, I suppose God could have written that part of Genesis and said something different like, and the sons of Seth compromised and married the daughters of men. But obviously he didn't, and I think the reason for that is he wanted us to figure it out. In other words, those who believed and walked with God compromised and started marrying into the pagan cultures back then. And it produced, not giants, it produced politicians and men of renown. The giants came first. Go back and read Genesis 6. The giants came first. Then came this compromise, which produced the elite of the world. And we're seeing it again now, today. The Nephilim of today are the rich merchants and the elite, as described in Revelations 18, the last couple of verses. They deceive the entire world through pharmakia. Does that sound familiar? Revelations 18:23. For your merchants were the princes of the earth, for with your sorcery all nations were deceived. The word sorcery there is pharmakia. We get the word pharmacy from it. Strongly suggesting that Big Pharma and all these politicians and zillionaires who are tied into this pandemic crisis are deceiving the entire world. And nobody seems to be able to stop them. Maybe slow them down a little bit, but they're ruling everything right now. AKA Nephilim. You got high tech, you got fake media, you got billionaires, zillionaires, and very rich politicians that are running the world. That is your Nephilim in today's day. Hey, I did a quick off-the-cuff calculation on how big a head of a 450-foot Nephilim would be. Its teeth have to be the size of a 55-gallon oil drum. An oil drum. And knowing that we have millions of bits and pieces of dinosaur bone, as well as complete skeletons of all kinds of dinosaurs, well, can somebody show me a pinky bone from one of these 450-foot Nephilim? I think that tooth the size of an oil drum would be preserved a lot better than a full skeleton from a T-Rex. And a T-Rex skeleton is only 40 feet long, 12 feet high. Here we have something 10 times that size, and probably had 10 times the number of Nephilim. I mean, weren't they ruling nations? How many Nephilim are that? Hundreds of millions? What were they eating? All the T-Rexes? Well, certainly they must have outnumbered all the dinosaurs, but not one fossilized pinky bone, or a fossilized tooth the size of an oil drum. Nothing in the fossil records, not one item that could be identified as being from a human hybrid Nephilim giant. Guys, there's your evidence. These things didn't exist. So let's keep this stuff out of the doctrine that's somehow supposed to get us closer to Christ. It doesn't. It does just the opposite. And it makes us look foolish and pathetic. So if you're seeing giants in dreams, it's not a hybrid from the impossible union of a fallen angel and the daughters of men. Rather, it's bullies, it's tyrants, it's dictators who think they have more money than God, who are establishing their own throne and their own kingdom on earth that they think they will rule and reign. These are the giants. How about the 10 kings of Revelation who do not have kingdoms as of yet, who will serve the Antichrist at some point in time? Those are your Nephilim. And if you work that narrative instead of 450-foot tall human hybrids that eat people, you stand a much better chance of maintaining your witness for Christ instead of being seen as some Looney Tune, in which case the rest of your testimony of preaching Jesus and Him crucified is severely diminished. Do you see how this stuff works? The adversary comes in and throws in this Christian mythology, rendering you almost useless in witnessing the true gospel. You cannot serve up pure water with mud mixed in with it. Let's get rid of the mud. And I need to emphasize this Christian mythology in the book of Enoch and Nibiru and Nephilim, because many of the dreamers out there in YouTube land will have a moon dream and don't understand. You can't have two moons. One must be planet X. No, God is just giving you calendar event emojis. And we lose our advantage that the Apostle Paul hoped we would all maintain, which is keep things real, keep them sensible, because you're an ambassador for the Lord. And if you're walking around like you really need to be fitted for a tinfoil hat and put on medication, how does that reflect and represent our King and Lord? But now you got the science. You got the God science. Science that God created. These things are important. The times of God are important. The calendars of God are important. What God is showing you is His calendar. He's trying to restore His appointed times because they've been so muffed up and messed up by religious talking heads that He's going to have to start all over. And when Jesus comes back and He rules for 1,000 years, He's going to follow God's calendar that Moses followed. That's why this stuff is so important. That's why we have to think and talk smartly. And if we don't, we will lose our witness. Sorry for rambling on, but I feel like the zeal of my Father's house is eating me up. And I want the moving of God's Spirit to be called the prophetic movement, not the pathetic movement. So here we go. This dream is from T Renshaw. I will call her T because that's how she refers to herself. And T Renshaw is her channel title. I believe the dream was received about mid-2020 because she talks about the Bethlehem star that everyone was infatuated with, and that possibly could be a solution to what she saw. Obviously it wasn't. And well, take a look, take a listen, and we'll get into it.
And keep in mind, I did not ask for this dream. I did not pray for this dream. I wasn't even thinking in regards to dreams about the rapture, and I certainly didn't feel like I was being led to talk about the rapture in this specific time. So then I have this dream, and now I'm struggling with myself saying, okay, why did I have this dream? Did the Lord give me this dream? Should I even share it? I need to trust what I feel like the Spirit is leading me to do. And I gotta say, I don't know exactly what it means just yet. So here's the dream. I'm driving around in my Jeep, and I have my kids with me, and my husband. Keep in mind, I didn't have any recollection of my home, my house. In fact, I remember we were staying at a hotel, or staying at hotels, and we were actually, I guess you can say, on a road trip of some sort. I had absolutely no recollection of my home. And so I had my kids in the car with me as well. Later in the dream, we had stopped in a parking lot, and it was nighttime. It was very dark. In fact, the entire dream had a night setting. So I was outside standing behind my Jeep. My kids were in the car, and I look up, and in the night sky, I see 2 red moons. I remember thinking in the dream that they could have been moons. And I remember thinking in the dream, oh my goodness, I remember some of my subscribers telling me they've seen 2 moons. But yet, they didn't look like moons. And this makes me think that people could have misinterpreted the dream as moons. Now that I'm really thinking back, they looked more like planets. They looked exactly like they do in this picture that you're looking at. Except I also remembered thinking they were on fire. So what had happened was I looked away and I opened my hatch and I was talking to my girls and saying, Jesus is coming, Jesus is coming. And I was jumping up and down and I was so excited, and I knew we were just about to go home. So then I looked back up at the sky, and at this point I remember just barely understanding what I was looking at. I remember gazing up at what had happened next and not quite being able to understand it. It was almost like looking through very blurry glasses. Have you ever put on someone's glasses and they were very blurry because it wasn't your prescription? It was almost like that. I didn't have a very clear view of what it was, but I remember knowing what was happening. The two planets that were next to each other. And view it like this. When I first looked, it looked like one planet in the front and one just right to the right, the lower right as a diagonal, right below it. But the next time I looked, the planets had locked side by side. It was like they interlocked with each other. However, there was something different at this point. It almost looked like there was something on top of the two planets. And it looked like they locked around each other with a beam of light. I saw this beam of light across the top, and it looked like it was forming a cross. It looked like some kind of interlocking alignment that fit perfectly. And what was so interesting about this is that I didn't remember thinking anything at that point. It was almost like I didn't have time to think, because immediately the scene cut off, and all of a sudden the dream got personal again. And I was actually at my stepmother's house for Christmas, and I thought that was very strange that the next scene skipped to Christmas. And I have to admit, it makes me initially think about the celestial alignment that we saw on the 21st, the Great Conjunction, people calling the Christmas star. And it's very interesting to me that I got very excited when I saw the two planets, and I thought Jesus was coming, and I was super excited. But then when I looked back, it was a different alignment, because it looked like when I first viewed the two planets, they had not interlocked. So they were moving closer and closer together until they perfectly interlocked, making that brightness of the cross. And when they interlocked, I saw that brightness of the cross.
So there's T's dream. You know, when I first saw this, I thought, great, another blood moon dream that makes no sense. Until I started understanding the keys that decipher these codes. Now, you got to understand, my job description in all this prophetic stuff is to bring the focus that was eluding her. She said, you know, it's like putting on some guy's glasses, wrong prescription, everything's blurry. And all I did was take what one dreamer saw, I took their glasses, and another dreamer, I took their glasses, and another dreamer took their glasses, and then lined these glasses up, that is what they saw, and we're finding focus. And if you would bear with me, I'll get you through this, and you'll see the focus, you'll see the clarity of this. Unfortunately, I might have to step on some toes, I might have to disagree with people, I might have to rub some people the wrong way. Please don't take offense if I do that. This is necessary to bring that focus. So if you or T or any of the dreamers have some emotional attachment to what they think their particular dream means, well, you might take offense and you're going to miss the message that's coming from this. And in this case with T, I have to disagree that what she saw was two red planets. And I'll prove that. Just give me the opportunity. I'll show that to you. It'll come into focus. And I think I got a good read on T's spirit, a very humble, God-loving, Jesus-loving person. And I trust the clarity that this brings will bring such a blessing to her life and to your life that you're not going to think back how I rubbed somebody the wrong way, okay? So bear with me. I'll walk you through this. I'll prove that this is talking about two blood moons and the importance of why it's talking about two blood moons. I will put both scenarios, that being, is it 2 blood moons or is it 2 blood planets? I'll put both of them through the paces. Only one works. The other one is a complete failure. And the one that works lines up with everything we've been talking about throughout this video, what it was pointing to, 2 blood moons. And she actually identifies what these on-fire orbs are by what she said and what Stellarium produces when you go in and you look at what she said. So I'll just get started. This will make total sense. You just got to follow me through this. Allow me to present my case. And once that's all done, if you don't see the incredible clarity of what this is saying, then you have my deepest apologies for rubbing you, T, or any of the dreamers the wrong way. That being said, I am 100% sure this is from God. It's just that the interpolation or the interpretation needs a little bit of tweaking. So the first thing she tells us is that she saw 2 blood moons. She didn't initially say 2 planets. Okay, it changed her mind later. I don't know if she changed her mind in the dream or if she changed her mind days later, weeks later, where she says, well, now I think back, and it may be there was 2 blood planets. But what she was sure of is this orb, be it a planet or a moon, looked like it was on fire. And in the dream, she had recalled a bunch of her subscribers to her channel contacting her about 2 moons, not 2 planets, 2 moons. That's right in the storyline of her dream. 2 moons. So where do the planets come from? No big deal. And she gave some particular and specific attributes of these 2 orbs. I'm going to call them orbs. 2 orbs that are on fire. One major revelation is that the second orb she saw at the beginning of this dream was down and to the right of the first orb. They were close, but the one farther to the right was down and at an angle. Well, that speaks of elevation. One of these orbs, at some point of some timeline, had a higher elevation from her viewpoint than the second one. The second one was to the right, which means it came later, a later period on that timeline, and it was lower. Now we've got 2 possibilities to examine, 2 blood moons or 2 planets. Let's start with the planets. Let's look at Mars. It's the only planet that's red. So let's look at a timeline we can all agree to that relates to all the timelines we've been talking about. Well, that's the timeline of these 4 blood moon tetrads. That makes sense. And I would think it's definitely after the time she received this dream, which I believe was sometime in the middle of the year 2020. It just happens that Mars does not break the horizon and reach an altitude that could be seen by the naked eye from the northern hemisphere in the continental United States until about July of 2021. So let's see what Mars does from the middle of July of 2021 to, let's say, the middle of July 2022. Every point along that timeline, it increases in elevation. What she saw was a decrease in elevation. And all the planets do this. Voila! They've all just been disqualified as being a candidate for what she saw. It's impossible. It doesn't meet the narrative of what she saw. Well, would a moon phase fit her narrative? So I took a look at the full blood moon of November 19th, that was Tabernacles of the year 2021, that was last year, and I looked at the full blood moon of May 16th, that's coming up here in a few months. I looked at it from the perspective of being in the continental United States when these 2 moons will be in their full eclipse. Blood red. I mean, after all, she saw this orb as being on fire and initially calling it blood moons. These are 2 very viable, very excellent candidates to be these 2 on fire orbs that she saw. What did their elevations look like in their full eclipse? Well, the one in November 19 of 2021 was at an elevation of 43 degrees. From her perspective. And lo and behold, the one that's coming up in May is at a lower elevation, at about 25 degrees. That is a dramatic drop in elevation between those 2 moon phases. So this matches perfectly what she saw. The first on-fire orb was higher. The second one was to the right, which means it will happen later on the timeline, and it was lower. Matches perfectly. So the possibility of planets, that scenario struck out. The 2 blood moon theory, home run. But we ain't done yet. And this speaks to the very frustrating learning curve that I've gone through trying to figure these things out. Because who says you're supposed to be seeing this from the perspective of the United States? Well, why not seeing it from Jerusalem? Why not seeing it from the international dateline? Why not seeing it from being directly under the event, the full moon eclipse? And this strongly has implications when you're trying to find out from what location on the planet you want to take the perspective of when you're looking at solar eclipses and how these different things interact with each other. Because a couple of these dreamers said, well, I saw this thing going from upper right to lower left. And here she's seeing things going from left to right. How do you figure this all out? Well, when you're talking about the blood moons, you have to go just like how we read. We read from left to right. So time would be described from left to right. In addition, those two eclipses, that would be the second blood moon of the 4 blood moon tetrad and the third one coming up shortly, May 16th, they both had occurred or will occur on different hemispheres. The one in November, I believe, kind of cut right through the middle of Mexico, headed towards the Pacific Ocean when it fully eclipsed. The one on May 16th is going to happen cutting through the middle of South America, heading out into the Pacific Ocean. So which one do you choose, Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere? Because it makes a difference. If you're on the Northern Hemisphere, looking towards the equator, all the precession of the heavenly bodies go from your left to your right. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, facing the equator, every heavenly body in the sky goes from your right to left. It's totally the opposite. She saw these two orbs going from left to right. Well, again, if we dial in the moons or the planets in this case, we got to find the right location where it goes from left to right. That would put her in the Northern Hemisphere, facing the equator, watching this moon or planet in its phases and on this timeline going left to right. The second orb was to the right and lower. Now we'll see later when we're talking about this beam of light that she sees in her dream and an asteroid and shooting star that these other two dreamers talk about. There it's going right to left. And you think you're confused. It took me about 6 hours to figure this out, and I am just beating my head against the wall, nearly screaming at the Lord. Like, I ain't going any further with this until it makes sense. I am not putting this stuff out because right now it's confusing, and I am not going to even think about tweaking 1 ounce of the data. That it's got to be solid. It's got to be true. All of it. It's either all of it or none of it. And like I said, God sends me down all these rabbit holes, knowing how frustrating it is for me, but he does it because then I know the counterfeit against the bright light of the truth. And it's the nature of the counterfeit to mimic as close as possible the truth. And the only way you could tell the difference between a counterfeit and the truth is the very fine details. These little nuances makes all the difference. So because both the planets and the moon, whichever scenario you want to examine, both of them, we would read from going from our left to the right and from a higher elevation to a lower elevation, because both of them, especially the moon, well, each phase transpired or will transpire in a different hemisphere. Tie goes to the runner, and that tie is, I'm going to go where she said she was parked with her family and looked up and saw it. Northern Hemisphere. Boom, it matches. And she couldn't be standing right under the event of the eclipse because both of the moons ended up in the middle of the Pacific. I don't think her Jeep could handle that. But you'll see when it comes to this beam of light that she sees in her dream and the alignment and the cross, that has to be taken from where that event takes place. And that event, well, there's 2 events. The first event is the partial lunar eclipse on April 30th. And that transpires on the southern tip of South America onto the continent of Antarctica. And that blood moon, 2 weeks later, is the one streaking across the middle of South America, both in the southern hemisphere. And that will produce the path, the trajectory of this asteroid or shooting star or streak of light from upper right to lower left. It fits, and that's the only way it fits. So welcome to my world. This is what I face when I'm forced down these rabbit holes because I got to find out the truth. So I can check off those 2 boxes. Which of these 2 scenarios has an orb that's on fire, moving to the right and losing elevation? It's the 2 moons. And if that doesn't help cement this, take a look at these 2 pictures. The one on the left is the blood moon of November 19th. The one on the right is Mars. You tell me which one looks like it's on fire. I mean, it looks like Mars got drugged through the mud. It's red, kind of like an old clay pot red. It certainly doesn't look like it's on fire. So in my estimation, that's another home run for the 2 blood moon theory. and another strikeout for it being a red planet. The only planet that's red for us is Mars. Doesn't work. But it's this next phase that just, another wow. She then said these two orbs lined up almost, if I could say, like face to face or shoulder to shoulder. So I'm assuming the second one was no longer down and to the right, but shoulder to shoulder, interlocking, touching. They're at the same elevation. Now, is that reflected in Stellarium when I look at Mars or when I look at the moon? Both separated by a short measure of time on their particular timeline. Well, Mars continues to rise. So you can take a point in time on that timeline, see what it does a day later, a week later, a month later, and it continues to rise. It's not shoulder to shoulder with itself between those 2 points of time that she's looking at. And that's what she's looking at. She's looking at 2 points in time on a timeline on an orbit of some planet or the moon. Mars doesn't work. Struck out again. And this is where another wow comes in. I looked at the moon. I checked it out on each one of its phases, the important phases of the moon. That would be the new moon, which is a sliver crescent, and the full moon. And its timeline that I'm looking at is from November 19th of last year to May 16th of this year. That's my timeline I'm working with. That's 6 months. And in that 6 months, there are 12 emphasized moon phases, being new moon, full moon, new moon, full moon, new moon, full moon, on that timeline, starting and ending with a full moon. 12 phases. And what she saw as far as the distance between the two orbs that were on fire, well, it's not a distance as far as miles or kilometers. It's the distance of time between the two phases. In other words, this dream is measuring time. It's not measuring miles or kilometers. And on that timeline, which I identify as the second and third full blood moon of the 4 blood moon tetrad we're currently standing in, that is a 6-month-long distance, a 6-month-long timeline. And as the days go on, whatever phase the moon is on the day you're considering the timeline, it's getting closer to the second orb. And the closest moon phase in relation to time to that second orb that's on fire is the crescent moon on May 1st or 2nd, depending upon when it manifests and busts through the 3 previous nights of total darkness, because the moon went into zero illumination, and that zero illumination moon is what will cause the solar eclipse the day before the new moon. But now we have a crescent moon on May 1st, separated in a distance described as time, which started out as 6 months. It's now down to 2 weeks. That time span, that distance, went from 6 months to 2 weeks, shoulder to shoulder, face to face as it were, with this beam of light connecting the two. And we see these two interlocked phases, and we discover when the moon finds its way into each individual phase, we find that they are at the exact same elevation. That is to say, when the moon comes into its dark phase with zero illumination on April 30th, 2022, that is also going to be its exact elevation 2 weeks later when it comes into the full blood moon phase, when it is fully eclipsed and fully blood moon, within 1 degree. That is impossible. I mean, you can advance the Stellarium clock ahead a couple hours or retard it a couple hours, and the elevation of the moon changes drastically. But in the middle of that solar eclipse, the elevation is going to be the exact same elevation of the moon when it's in full eclipse 2 weeks later. This is mind-boggling. Maybe not for someone who's never looked up at the moon or consider these things or have any life experience in the sciences or engineering or stuff like that. You that do have that background will appreciate this. I mean, this is totally impossible. And she saw it in her dream. They were side by side. And what was keeping them side by side? They were locked by a beam of light. Well, first let me say, planet struck out again. The 2 blood moon contingency just won the World Series. It's 2 blood moons. But it gets even more better and more wow. There's this beam of light that she sees in her dream on top of the 2 moons, holding them together, locking them together. There's an interlocking. I think she called it an interlocking alignment, and it produces a cross. Not only does this beam of light, when it's coming in, as it were, it was forming a cross, and I'll explain that. But now it's standing on top of the two moons, I would think kind of like a parallel trajectory of that of the moons. And she then says something about the light of the cross. She sees the brightness of the cross. And I will also show that this is exactly what happened. Because right in the middle of this, the alignment does produce where you can put a cross right there. Right in the middle of it's the sun. How's that for an analogy of the brightness of the cross? So real quick recap. The distance between these orbs is a distance in time, and it's measuring how this time is getting shorter and shorter and shorter between moon phases. And we go from 6 months to 2 weeks, producing an elevation of the moon from her perspective at the time of the solar eclipse, which happens down in Antarctica. It produces an elevation of the moon identical to the elevation it's going to be 2 weeks later during that last phase of the moon from new crescent moon to full blood moon. 2 weeks. I mean, what else can I tell you? That's it. That's what she saw. That's an identical match, demonstrated by the virtual reality of Stellarium. And the message that this is bringing is Jesus is returning. So we all have a dog in the fight here. This is serious stuff. And it's coming to pass. And now you see why I spoke of how I'm not putting too much concern in how I stroke people the wrong way, because it got me to the truth. And if they be as a Berean and look at this and go in and research it and test my stuff, they're going to find the same thing, and they're going to come away with clarity. Whereas they started out with, I don't know what this means. When I started out, I didn't either. But now we have clarity. And it took me disagreeing with somebody and testing the spirit, testing the truth, testing the facts. That's how it's done. And I'm referring more to some of these celebrity watchmen on the wall and celebrity prophets and apostles who post every 5 minutes, who at one time have labeled themselves as prophetic, hearing from God, and then putting out dates and times that just produce nothing but face plants, train wrecks. And then they go and do it all over again. And so we have people like T and Holly and Crystal. These guys are putting themselves out there, and they just get hammered by naysayers and kooks and whatever comes along. And they find themselves being groomed into a position where they're not going to listen to anybody. And I've tried reaching out to some of these dreamers and say, look what I have. And I guess it's taken as an offense that I'm even trying, because I've had my posts deleted or whatever. Hey, I get it. I understand it. I understand the battle. I've been into the arena for many years now. And as far as I'm concerned, you guys are rock stars in my book. I mean, I hope you see that what this video is doing is confirming that what you saw in these dreams was prophetic. It is authenticating your dreams, which authenticates God's anointing upon you. And I hear in the back of my mind, well done, my good and faithful servant. That being said, there's also some things that need to be addressed. Things that have harmed the body of Christ, and we all have that. And I know some of the dreamers out there are dialed into these other false watchmen on the wall. I hear names being dropped every now and then. I went, oh no, they're not listening to this person. Oh, God help them. So again, please don't take my approach, my bedside manner, as I'm here to bust somebody in the chops. I mean, even the Apostle Paul got firm with those around him, those ministering with him. I think he even rebuked Peter to his face. And sometimes when we're in this arena, there's little time or little opportunity to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. This is serious stuff. And what I see God trying to establish through this, the emphasis, is the restoration of time. He's trying to restore time, his appointed times. Times that have been perverted and changed by the Antichrist spirit, as prophesied by the prophet Daniel. And when did this start? Ask Moses. He prophesied that the second he leaves, the children of Israel would pervert and corrupt themselves, which is exactly what happened. And since the Hebrew church and the Christian church still exchange what Moses was told to do, what Moses did, and what Moses recorded in the Torah, since they still avoid all that, then you can be sure they're not on God's time. Time has been lost. God's time. And he's going to get it back. And he's going to start with new beginnings on his Rosh Hashanah, on the Rosh Hashanah that he gave Moses, on the Passover that his only begotten son died on the Pentecost that was experienced by the 120 in the upper room. And all the appointed times have been changed. Easily demonstrated, easily proven, but so hard to see through the glasses of tradition and the fear of rocking the boat. Well, God's going to rock the boat. There is going to be a 911 experience, and I'm going to share that with you later. I keep seeing 911 when I wake up in the middle of the night on my clock, plus other numbers that indicate rapture soon and the storm from hell to follow. And God will confirm this. I believe he's going to do so with this beam of light that T saw in her dream. And this emphasis on God's true Rosh Hashanah and the true discerning of Passover. Well, you'll see him confirm this when the dance of these celestial objects come to pass. And at the end of this video, I'm going to show you one that's almost bigger than the one we're looking at right now with this beam of light. But getting back to this beam of light, we now have a triple emphasis because I found it in 3 of the dreamer's dreams. You see it with the cracked star becoming light, where the dreamer drew a picture of a beam of light or a smear of light, and you hear it in T's narrative where she talks about a beam of light, and here's the 3rd dream that mentions a beam of light. You should remember this dream. This is a dream about the moon having a crown on its upper left-hand side as it's approaching the horizon. And this was specifically matched in Stellarium, as you can see on your screen. And in all of these cases, the cross begins to form from this object that's causing the beam of light, but there's no mention of a cross literally being formed as a result of it. And you'll see here in a little bit, this is exactly what happens when presented on Stellarium. So listen to what she has to say about a beam of light.
And in the corner of this circle was this beam of rainbow light that almost looked like a cross.
Now the reason I missed it the first time is when she was describing her dream, she was pointing at the crown and she did not picture in a cross. What she said was a rainbow beam of light that almost formed a cross. So again, we have a beam of light, in this case a rainbow colored, and we have a cross. And the fact that she mentions a cross, well, that's triple emphasized now, because T mentions the brightness of the cross, Crystal Clay talks about a shooting star crossing a crescent, and here in this dream she talks about a cross. So that too is triple emphasized. So all these little nuances, such as a cross being formed, are extremely accurate in how they've been described. In this case, she says it almost looked like a cross. I mean, this is critical, this is specific. All 3 of them talk about this object beginning to form a cross. None of them ever said it completed that formation. And we'll see with Stellarium that this object does exactly that. It'll start to form a cross, then at the last moment, it'll change its direction from where you thought it would form a cross to where it aligns itself in the same direction as the sun and the moon. I find these small nuances to be quite remarkable. And so too will be a triple emphasis in part number 5, where God reveals a 911 event, and God had me put a fleece before him to confirm this 911 event, and this fleece was over the moon, so to speak. And he answered that fleece. And his message pointed to the true Rosh Hashanah, which is the foundation for all the dates of his appointed times. In addition, these dreams and God's leading, in my estimation, is pointing to a restoration of that Rosh Hashanah and all his appointed times, his covenant dates, and convocations. That's what's being revealed in these dreams, as well as these new dreams we've just been receiving over the last few weeks and few days. And I'm thinking God's going to walk us through every one of his appointed times for the year 2022 to emphasize and demonstrate his Hebrew calendar that he gave to Moses. Because I'm thinking that's the calendar and the methodology that our Lord Jesus Christ is going to use during his millennial reign. Wouldn't it be nice to be on the same sheet of music that he's operating from? So before I direct you to part 4 of this 5-part video series, I'm going to cover this one dream that Holly Two Moons had about 2 years ago on about the 3rd week of January. She says it's 2 days from the 20th. And I'm thinking, well, just call it the 18th. But no, there's a reason for that, the number 2. And this is what I would call the dream that the builders rejected, because I about rejected it. I could not figure this one out for the life of me. And she says the same thing. And I'll let you listen to it, then I'll make comment, and I'll show you that this was a powerful dream and a confirmation for the entire 4 blood moon tetrad we're currently in, as well as making an argument for our remaining enthusiasm and focus to be on that very last blood moon and that festival of tabernacles and trumpets, October 26th for trumpets and November 9th for the first day of tabernacles. It all has to do with moon circuits.
I then saw the moon. I saw a man or an angel. I don't know who it was. Someone was standing behind the moon, and he was pointing down at the moon. You can see here there's these like little squiggly lines. When he pointed down at the moon, he was demonstrating these lines to me and said that they were circuits, the circuit of the moon. And he said, 2 circuits of the moon, 2 circuits of the moon. I don't know if that's like 2 days or 2 years or some sort of measurement of time, whatever 2 circuits means. He was like standing behind the moon and pointing down at, I don't know, he just said these were the circuits. I don't know what that means. And he said 2 circuits of the moon. Okay, but the first thing that stands out to me is that number 2 related to the moon again, because you guys know the Lord gives me that dream all the time, and I know you guys have it all the time too, that when the rapture happens, we see 2 moons in the sky. I don't know if that's literal or symbolism, but that's the dream. Let me know your guys' thoughts. We're 2 days out from January 20th.
So what you're looking at is the year 2021 and the year 2022 and the respective eclipses. And what you're looking at is a multitude of moon circuits. Well, what's a moon circuit? A moon circuit is a timeline of the moon phasing as time progresses. It could be from a sliver crescent moon to the next one. It could be from a full moon to a full moon. And what you're looking at is the 4 blood moon tetrad, 4 blood moons. That in and of itself is a circuit. The angel, or whoever is behind the moon pointing at these squiggly lines, calling them circuits, said there was 2 of them. Well, we got 2 years, and in those 2 years, we have 2 blood moons, 2 and 2. And each one of those blood moons is 2 moons. If we look at it from the standpoint that 2 moons in the same night will produce a blood moon, there's another set of 2s. And you also see in 2021 a solar eclipse following a lunar eclipse or blood moon. 2 of them. There's another couple 2s. And in 2022 it flipped to where you have the blood moon following the solar eclipse. And what's between those solar eclipses and the lunar eclipses? 2 weeks. So we have 2 years making up the 4 blood moon tetrad, consisting of 2 blood moons the first year, 2 blood moons the second year. We've got solar eclipses following blood moons and blood moons following solar eclipses twice in each year, and there are 2 weeks between those phases. Dial in that 2 days from January 20th, all seen by a young lady who calls herself Holly Two Moons. I've got about 10 2s in this equation. So I think what these 2 circuits represent that this angel was pointing to, the angel standing behind the moon pointing at him, calling them circuits, is that we have all these moon phases and sun phases. And where do they finish up? The partial solar eclipse of October 25th and the blood moon of November 7th through the 8th. The very next day at sunset begins Tabernacles for this year 2022. No kidding she's called Holly Two Moons, because she's getting a lot of 2 moons. And this all dials in to what we've been seeing of late, going back and updating all these moon dreams, that God is going to walk us through all his appointed times, covenant dates, and convocations for the very year where all these dreams are pointing to, that is this year, 2022. If you're not seeing this, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. But this is confirmation after confirmation after confirmation. We're going to see this stuff in the year 2022. And this last blood moon is rapidly approaching us. So, go ahead and pull your cursor to the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Pull down that small white sphere with an eye in it. That's your iCard. Click on it. That'll drop down a menu that'll get you to video 4. And there you also see some of the other videos that I mentioned during this video, all of them of which I highly recommend. There's a lot of teaching there. Yeah, it's long, but that's the nature of teaching videos. So go ahead, jump ahead to video 4. And on that video, we'll be discovering and identifying that cracked star, that beam of light, that rainbow beam of light, that possible great wonder into heaven that I think God's going to give us here shortly.